Opening, cold open plus setup. We came over the rise and smelled it before we saw it. Fat, onions, real coffee cutting through damp canvas and diesel. Steam rolled off field kettles like fog. A cook with forearms like hams flicked his ladle and laughed at the way we stared. I was still counting. 1 tray, 2 scoops, 3 slices, reflex, the ration ledger in my head. Behind me, men who'd marched on half rations watched the bins with the hunger of thieves. This late in the war, we'd lived on ersatz coffee, barley water, black bread that broke teeth, and the thing that finished us wasn't the meat. It was what they threw away. Body eye. Before capture, scarcity, improvisation, and the ledger in our heads. 2 weeks earlier, we were still on the road, counting calories like ammunition. On paper, the ration said 300 to 500 grams of bread. In the hand, it was a stingy heel, black, damp, and heavy with fillers. Soup appeared when the cook found water and will. Thin barley, a whisper of cabbage, the occasional cube of horse if a team collapsed. Spreads were ersatz, brown paste that promised fat and delivered dust. We improvised because we had to. Sugar beets roasted in mess tins, more smoke than sweetness. Coffee stretched with chicory until it tasted like burned dirt. Nettles boiled to fool the stomach, and men traded cartridges for a spoon of lard because fat meant another hour on your feet. I reasoned that a belt hole notched tighter was a debt to be repaid, but the bills kept coming. Fuel was the first enemy. Without it, kitchens stalled. Rail meant nothing when the rails were twisted, when jabos, fighter bombers, hunted by day and the quartermaster's voice became a rumor. Depots promised relief until they didn't. We learned to listen for trains the way we once listened for artillery. Silence meant hunger. Morale lived in a simple equation. A march cost calories, an attack cost tomorrow's march. We weighed orders against the bread bag. Leaders knew. Some bartered favors for tins, others hoarded. A lieutenant in our company, a decent man, cut his portion to feed a runner who was shaking. The next day, during the forced march, the lieutenant sat down on a ditch stone and slid to the mud like a puppet with the strings cut. He woke with a split lip and nothing left to spend. The comparisons were forbidden, but they crept in with rumors. The armée said the Americans swam in tins, ate chocolate like bread, brewed coffee by the barrel. Most of us dismissed it as propaganda in reverse, fantasies to poison discipline. But sometimes, near a crossroads, we'd find a burst K-ration tin flattened in the dust, English letters half legible, and it felt like a postcard from another war. We became accountants. Every step had a number, every order a cost. A night attack wasn't courage, it was subtraction in the dark. When the quartermaster vanished, we learned the contours of our own limits. How far on 200 grams, how fast after 1 ladle, how long you could pretend salt water was soup if you closed your eyes. The comparison we pretended not to make arrived soon enough, in steel cans and hot plates, under a sky we didn't control. Body 2. Capture and the American field kitchen. The shock of plenty. We were taken at a crossroads where the hedges trapped sound. Rifles stacked, bolts yanked clear, pockets turned out into a single sad pile of crumbs and buttons. A sergeant with a sunburnt neck sorted us with a glance. Wounded to the left, officers to the rear, the rest into a file. Before the fear settled, another current reached us, fat warming with onions. It drifted over diesel and wet wool and cut straight through the ledger in my head. They waved us toward a line as if we were late to a scheduled appointment. Trays, ladles, a rhythm like drill. The kitchen crew moved with the same economy I'd seen in a well-trained machine gun team. One man with a long spoon patrolled the kettles. Another kept bread piling up on a board. A boy, no older than our youngest, stacked cups and kept count aloud, then didn't bother when he saw we were too slow to cheat. The meal was not ceremonial. Meatloaf or stew, depending on which kettle you reached. Potatoes that held their shape. White bread that tore in clean shreds and didn't clump on the tongue. Butter, pale and real. coffee that smelled like mornings we'd forgotten. A medic drifted along the column and pressed chocolate into the hands of the wounded as if he were issuing bandages. No speeches, no taunts, just portions. When the first cup touched lips, men cracked, not loud, a sound like snow giving way on a roof, soft and dangerous. I took small sips, reflexively rationing them, waiting for the reprimand. The cup came back full without a word. The cook with forearms like hams watched us with a practical eye and tipped an extra ladle into the tray of a boy whose hands shook. No performance, just motion. Then the detail that lodged like shrapnel. The trash. Bins with peelings, heel ends, crusts with teeth marks, half-eaten tins, their lids peeled back in tidy rings, stacked and thrown away with an indifference I couldn't compute. Abundance measured by what they didn't finish. I felt a pull in my gut that wasn't hunger anymore. It was the ledger tearing itself up. We studied their rations like intelligence officers. K rations laid out on a crate, tins stamped with contents and weight, crackers uniform, a small packet that said sugar, another that said cheese spread, calories printed as if they were boasting. 1 box, 1 meal, 3 times a day if the plan held. Our mess kits had become talismans. Theirs were just tools in a system that worked. Discipline inverted itself in front of the kettles. Our guards stood with weapons slung and boots clean, correcting a spacing here, a tone there, nothing more. We, who had once lectured about bearing, stood like beggars at a church door, heads bent, grateful not to be hit for moving slow. A small humiliation came with the napkins. Paper disposable handed out with the tray. Soap at a water can, the smell of it sudden and foreign. We reeked like barns. They told us to wash before we ate. Behind the line sat the rest of the machine. Field ovens with chimneys that folded down. Insulated carriers, silver, tight-lidded, that kept soup hot like a thermos but for a company. Fuel cans stacked in a pyramid, the stenciling clean and legible. A water unit churning out safe water by the barrel while a corporal logged numbers on a clipboard and adjusted portions when our count shifted with the wounded. I watched long enough to understand this wasn't charity. It was doctrine. They were feeding prisoners because it was on the schedule, because the schedule assumed friction and still padded for surplus. The shock of plenty wasn't the taste. It was the seamless way the taste arrived, on time, with enough for seconds. Body 3. Understanding the system. Why abundance is a weapon. A day later, in a holding yard strung with wire and improvisation, the pattern came into focus. Their manuals, I later learned, treated food like ammunition for morale. In practice, you could see it in the way hot meals arrived as if tethered to the units they served. Warm food tightened a formation you couldn't tighten with threats. Hunger frayed it faster than any barrage. Redundancy was built into every decision. If rail failed, trucks took the load. If trucks couldn't get through, depots stepped forward like chess pieces advancing to support the file. In our case, when a bridge went out, everything stopped. For them, another bridge appeared, or a ferry, or a bypass already scouted and marked on a map nobody argued with. Tempo didn't wait for the kitchen. The kitchen kept up. Their skies protected their roads. We had learned to hug hedges and creep by night while Jabos prowled. They drove at noon in columns that didn't scatter when a shadow crossed. Air cover wasn't just bombs and guns. It was confidence. Confidence told a driver to push 5 kilometers more. Confidence told a cook to light burners on time in full daylight. Standardization made it idiot-proof. 1 burner, 1 box, 1 tin that fit into 1 pocket of the same pack across 4 armies. Our mess kits were a museum of shortages, some deep, some shallow, many dented and unique, none interchangeable. With them, you could step into any unit and know which valve to twist, which lid to lift, which ladle fit, which pot. Mistakes were rare because opportunities for mistakes had been removed like burrs from metal. The quartermaster wasn't a beggar in their hierarchy. He issued, scheduled, and expected compliance. Our supply men improvised until improvisation became a habit and then a prison. Their clerks wrote numbers that became trucks that became hot stew on time. It felt unfair because it was professional. I watched a corporal run head count in the yard. He counted rows, multiplied, frowned, and walked off. 10 minutes later, he came back with a carrier and a small wooden crate. He didn't announce a miracle. He handed the crate to the cook and said, "Enough for the extra 30. No drama, just correction." The psychological effect was blunt. Hot food told you tomorrow existed because someone had prepared it yesterday and moved it toward you today. We had learned not to plan beyond dusk because dusk ate plans. When I held a tray and listened to the clink of ladle on metal, I realized I was being told in the simplest grammar that continuity was their weapon. There was a quiet message buried under the napkins and the butter. If they fed us like this without malice or ceremony, what were they feeding the armored spearheads that were still moving east? If waste marked margin, then the trash by the kitchen wasn't carelessness. It was signal, a plan that expects attrition and still overshoots feeds men who go faster, shoot straighter, and argue less. We'd called our endurance bravery. In this case, they called their planning normal. We bled to cover missing trains and called it hardness. They assigned a truck and made the train unnecessary. The difference wasn't mystical. It was practical to the point of boredom. The last piece fell into place when I realized the ledger in my head had no application here. My mental math, how far on 200 grams, how long after one ladle, meant nothing when a schedule erased scarcity. Abundance in their hands wasn't indulgence. It was a weapon that kept formations intact, engines fed, and minds unfrayed. It didn't feel glorious. It felt inevitable. Body fu, aftermath in the cage, recalculating identity and war, 520 words. In the wire, hunger gave way to routine. 3 meals, roll calls, a medic's glance, and the strange quiet of a stomach that no longer argued. I'd measured worth by refusal to quit. Here, endurance wasn't currency. Skill felt ornamental. At night, men asked whether we ever had a chance once that machine rolled. I wrote home about coffee and left out the bins. A former baker held white bread like porcelain and spoke of strong flour and mills that hadn't been bombed. A hauptman admitted he'd lost more to cold and hunger than bullets. A guard peeled an orange for us. Conclusion, resolution, and broader meaning. A hot tray in a prisoner's hands explained the campaign better than arrows on any map. Planning beat valor because it removed the need to prove it daily. If you want more first-hand accounts that cut through slogans and show war as it was lived, in rations, boots, and orders, subscribe. Watch the next story about the day we learned the sky, not the trenches, decided our fate.